So it is 11 o'clock in the Eastern time zone. Welcome everyone to the presentation on contributing to GitLab localization. I'm glad you're all here. So first of all, let me just introduce ourselves. Let's see. All right, you want to say hi?
Hi, my name is Arika Lewinsky, and I'm the Group Product Manager for the Managed Stage here at GitLab. You can find my Twitter and GitLab handle below.
And I'm Harris Dalalik. I am the Product Manager in charge of internationalization, where translation lives. And welcome all, and thanks for joining. So today's agenda is going to look like this. We're gonna introduce ourselves in the chat, and maybe even say a few words in whatever languages we all bring with us. We'll look at sort of how localization and translations work in GitLab, and then we'll do an interactive session where we'll try to at least contribute a couple of translations to GitLab. So if you would please in the chat share, where you're from or where you currently live, what languages you speak, so that we can all kind of see the cornucopia of where all the GitLabbers live. Kalispera, good afternoon. Bonjour, hola. I'll try some of these. Hello, London.
Yeah, we got some Mandarin and Greek and Spanish.
That is awesome.
You should see how Harris is getting excited about all this translation that's going to come in. Sanjan, if you could just write in English whatever you're writing so that we can attempt the pronunciation and you can make fun of us later, that would be great.
Or if any one of you would like to just join the actual join with voice and or video and just say something in your language or teach us a word, you're welcome to do that.
Annyeonghaseyo. How did I do?
Annyeonghaseyo.
Cool. So I'll also voice over some of the things that I wrote in the chat. So shalom is hello. Bruchim habaim is welcome. Boker tov, good morning. Tzoraim tovim, good afternoon. And Laila tov, good evening for everyone around the world.
Willkommen für alle deutschsprachige GitLaber. Willkommen is welcome in German. Dobrodošli is welcome in Bosnian. Cool, this is fun. We could do this for a while, but we need to move on. So let me give you a quick overview over how GitLab localization works. Group import is responsible for the internationalization category. That involves everything from translation to instrumenting these translations, getting them from the translating tool into GitLab, and vice versa, pushing any new strings that we create in GitLab out to the tool. Something where we haven't really spent enough time is really kind of the remainder of the localization. So the ability for us to not just speak the language, but also respect the date, number, and other settings that that kind of allow us to speak the local language much better. We do rely on the translation community to do translations. This is a kind of a voluntary group of people who work for GitLab, as well as people from outside of GitLab who just contribute to our translations. There are two groups of, or two levels of translators. One is the translators, which are, which do translations, and they also vote on other people's translations. So that helps us, discuss and figure out which translations are better. And then we have proofreaders, which there is at least one per language. Actually, there's some languages which have none, but there should be at least one per language. And these are the final approvers of a particular translation. A translation only shows up in GitLab if it has been proofread and approved, which is one of our hurdles. So if you take a look at the image that I've pasted here, this shows sort of the levels of translations for the top languages. Blue is translated and green is approved. So you can see that, for example, in Chinese, we're pretty much keeping up, and we do get most of the strings translated and approved sort of as we add them to GitLab. Some of the other languages, for example, French, we have everything translated, 100% translated, but only 11% of those strings are actually going to show up in GitLab because we don't have enough proofreaders and approvers who can actually work on that. So that's one of the challenges I'll be talking about. At the bottom, you can see some statistics, how many words we have.
Harris.
Yes.
What does the QA box on the next to the languages mean?
That means that there is there's an error or a bug or something that needs some quality eye on it. So, for example, if a translation involves a variable, something like X members, like 3 members, 5 members. So if the translator omits the variable X, it will show up as a QA note or a bug, which means that the translation is not going to be acceptable because it is missing a required variable in it.
We also have some questions from the crowd. So Christos wants to know, what are the requirements for becoming an approver? How can we make this easier?
That's a really great question. So the approvers have to have experience being translators for a while. Maybe they've done that with GitLab for some time. They need to be familiar with the GitLab vocabulary, which is important because we talk about certain things in certain ways. You can't just literally translate things. These could also be translators who have experience in other projects. So if they've been doing other technical translations, it doesn't have to be that they have a lot of GitLab experience. But typically what happens is we will have some of the senior translators or proofreaders take a look at the work that they've done and sort of promote them to a proofreader. So the process is not very formal, but we do kind of try to promote translators with experience into proofreaders. By the way, the tool that we use is called Crowdin. It's an external tool that that we do the translations in.
So Harris, if I wanted to become a proofreader or approval, I would actively have to be working on Crowdin to insert my translations. And then what do I open an issue, and then someone will review my translations and so on?
Yes. So to become a proofreader, we do have that documented in, and I will post a link.
There's a
we
link
have,
posted in the chat. It's posted the handbook, marketing, localization. Is that the one?
let me check, because I think that they both point at the same, in the same spot eventually. So to become a proofreader, I have a more direct link for that. Let me post that. I could find the right window here. So I think I've lost.
Well, Amy has come to the rescue. We have here a link going to I18N proofreaders, become a proofreader. That seems to be the winner.
Yes, that's it.
So,
That's the link I was looking for. Sorry. And thank you for doing
that's
that.
great. That's fine. That's fine. So Harris, another question from the crowd is this I assume is translation or becoming a proofreader, someone that anyone can do? Can it be a GitLab team member, a community member? Can it be anyone?
Yes, it could be anyone with a passion for translating. And we have probably more translators from the community than we do from within GitLab. Probably more proofreaders from GitLab than we have from within community, but it is not a rule of any sorts. It is just kind of how things work out. But yeah, we do have a lot of participation from inside and outside of GitLab, both proofreading and translating.
Well, that's great, because there's a great suggestion here from the community relation team that are thinking of other ways to engage the community beyond code contributions, which this could definitely be a great idea. And maybe, after contribute, we could take this offline and continue talking about how we can engage the community.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to do as much as possible of that. And it'd be great if we could engage our top translators as well, and maybe even send them some swag. Should be talking to the community team about that.
Great. So I apologize. I stopped you mid-slide. You wanted
Okay.
to talk about the different statistics on the bottom of the slide.
So that's just more of an illustration. What I really want to talk about is how this works. And I've mentioned a tool named Crowdin is where we go to do translations. We do monthly merges of strings from Crowdin that were translated in Crowdin into GitLab, and at the same time, we also sync up our available strings for translation, which means that the Crowdin will also get once a month a push of new strings that need to be translated. The choices of the UI, the choices of the language in the UI really depend on the level of translation. So just when we start translating, when we have few strings translated, we don't want that choice to be there in the UI, because it would be a bad experience for someone to select a language and then notice that it's really all still English, because they just can't find the one string that was translated. So we tried to get to maybe a 10% translation level, because before we show that translation in the UI, you will be able to, you can actually select the language that you want to see GitLab in under your user settings, profile, preferences, localization, and then select the language. We are also doing once a month the update of the level of translation. So you can get an idea for when you're selecting a language, like how much should you expect there to be translated. So if I'm selecting Italian and we have a 2% translated, I don't expect really much to be there. But if I take something that is like a Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, and half of it's been translated, I would expect a lot of it to be translated. So that's kind of where you go and how you do that. So some of the challenges that we face. The whole manual merge of translations is a challenge. I do this once a month, and this is kind of as often as I can do it, because time prohibits me from doing that more often. But that still means that it takes a month or two after you translate something before you can actually see it in the GitLab UI. So you don't get that instant gratification there to see your translation live. it'd be great if we could have this more often, but to do that, we would have to automate some of the process, which just we weren't able to make a priority up until now. Keeping the community engaged is also tough. We really just rely on people's enthusiasm to do this. So I think maybe the community team might have some ideas on like what are some of the things that we can do to engage more people and to also entice them more to do that. Also, if you take a look at like sort of translations, they do come in waves. Someone will get engaged. Like just recently, we had a great contributor join who contributed to a lot of Norwegian translations. We didn't have Norwegian really as a choice when we started this, but at this point, Norwegian's been translated to a very solid level, and you can see a spike there. And we've had spikes like that before, where someone would get engaged, do a lot of translations, but then they would get busy and fall off, and it's really hard to keep the community engaged on a kind of a constant basis, as opposed to in waves or one-offs. We also have a lot of strings, many more strings that were translated than approved. So really getting the proofreaders to just go through the strings that have been translated and approve them would significantly increase the translation levels that we currently have. We also are speeding up our development, with each milestone. There's more and more strings being added. So even if everything stayed the same, we would need to get more people to translate each month because we have new strings arriving. With that, we also have the translation loss. So a lot of times when new translations are added, some translations are taken away, translations are changed. So if we just decide to change a wording, even if it's just like adding a comma to fix a typo in a large chunk of text, we will lose that chunk of text for all the languages it's been translated on, because it is now a new string. And that's been something that has happened a lot. So if you take a look at the bottom chart here, you will see how many words were added, how many words were deleted. And we don't have updates. So this is a misnomer there. We really just either add or delete words. Most of the deleted words were replaced with something else. Like we rarely just delete a lot of views. We just delete some of the strings that we have and then replace them with new ones that are similar or fixed or updated. But there's been a lot of loss of translation because of that. So let's see if there's questions or thoughts about this before we move to the next step.
It doesn't look like there's any questions from the crowd.
Oh, perfect. So the next step will be for us to take a look at the tool and for all of you to do some translations. So I want you all to start here. Or thank you for posting that link in the chat. So if you click in on the link in the chat, it will take you to translate.gitlab.com, which is our translation tool. You can sign up. So if you have never signed in or signed up, you can use your GitLab Google account to just sign in, and you will automatically be able to start translations.
Harris, why don't we give it a couple of minutes so people can log into the system? Maybe in the meantime, you can share the Crowdin screen so people can see what to expect.
Yep. So once you're logged in, you will land on this view that shows you the GitLab project and shows you all the languages in alphabetical order that we have available for translation. So create the account, get here and find the language you're interested in.
It would be great if the crowd that's joining Crowdin could give us a thumbs up or some kind of indication that it's okay, you have it up and running, or if you have any questions.
If you have questions, please ask, and I'll try to help along. Awesome. So if the language that you are looking for is not available, ping me directly because we're in GitLab. You can just post in the I18N channel. But normally what people do from outside is they create an issue and they mention me the issue asking for a particular language to be added to be translatable. And we do that all the time. We're just a little bit more judicious about adding the language to the UI, but just opening it up for translation, we're very open to that. So the very first thing that I would like for you to do is go look at the language that you're interested in, and you will see two files in theory. One is called the GitLab, as in translation, and the other one is the glossary. If you're just starting, or if this language hasn't got a lot of translations, it's always good to start with the glossary, which means we're really not translating strings that are going to be used in GitLab directly, but we are translating the glossary, all the words. We're deciding what we're going to call the all of these words. So words such as issue have to be agreed upon and figured out how we're going to talk about issues. Direct translation to some languages don't work, so some of the languages use the word ticket or problem in order to speak about issues. Similarly, in here you will also find typically a discussion that's really important is the one about the word you and how we talk to people. So how is you translated? A lot of languages have formal use, informal use, and each translation community, each language makes its own decision as far as what is the appropriate level of formality for that particular translating language. So those are discussions to be had in the glossary. So the glossary is where we decide, we agree on which version of you or what translation for a particular word we're going to use. Once the glossary is set, or if this language has a lot of translations in, then you really can go into translations. And in translations, you will have the benefit of the glossary. So for example, if I'm translating this string, which is %the package for one, or %the packages for multiple, if this word has been added to the glossary, if the word package has been added to the glossary, which in this case it has, and it's translated as packet, then we know that this is the word that we're all using for that particular translation. So, for me to translate this, I would have to use the variable that's given to us. So you have to use the variable. And this is how a one package would be translated into Bosnian. It would be %d, which stands for one in this case, one packet. If you have a few packets, so some, unlike English where you have just a singular and plural, some of the languages have kind of three levels of, or two levels of plural. One is for few things, and then there is another translation for many. So if this is a one packet, the plural for that would be 2 or 3 packets. And then the plural for when you have like 5 or more in Bosnian would be the same, but there could be some languages where it's not. So this is how we would translate this one particular source string and make sure to do it for all the different forms. Save it, and now the translation has been saved. Other people can vote on it, and eventually an approver may come along and decide that this is good enough. So questions about this? Is everybody able to go into their language and find something to translate?
Okay, there's another session. This is the first session of two. Let's see who's going to be the winner on how many contributions for translations there is. Is it going to be this session or is it going to be the next one? Harris is keeping track.
Great point. I will. So I'm showing kind of this year's translation scores, but I will definitely be looking at the translations that happen today versus translations that happen tomorrow during the other session, and I'll let you all know which day won. But in the meantime, these are some of the.
There's a request if you can make your screen size a little bit larger because it's hard to read.
Most definitely. So we're very thankful to these translators who've put a lot of work this year. Okay, so I'll let you complete a few translations that you're working on. I do want to talk about, so this is translating. You can also be voting, and approving is, you won't be able to approve things yet because you're not a proofreader, but let me see if I have an example of where we might be able to vote on something.
While you search for that, Harris, there's a question. There are some things that can't be translated. Shall we leave them in English? I'll give you an example. CI, Istio, like a name of a package or a name of a terminology.
Great question. So certain brand names or certain trademarks or things that, that are just proper names should not be translated. So, we wouldn't translate GitLab. We wouldn't translate Git. We probably wouldn't translate fork or some of the technical lingo. It really depends. So this is kind of where the technical knowledge comes in. It depends on how these developers, let's say, talk amongst each other when they're in their country speaking their language. So if we have a bunch of Ukrainian developers talking to each other in Ukraine about Git, if they use the word Git, then that's the word we should use. If they use the word fork, then that's the word we should use. If they translate the fork and use a native word for that process, then we should translate it as well. But typically, if these are commands, like Git commands or proper names, those should not be translated because we don't want to confuse people as far as what we mean by certain things. So definitely there are words that should not be translated, and the extent of how far we go with some of these things really depends on the language. I know one of the very tough words that we've had to think about over the last couple of years is the word epic. Like in English, the Agile has really introduced to us the word epic as a large story, and we're all familiar with it. And when somebody says epic nowadays, I don't really think about like an Odyssey or any kind of like old stories that are very big. I really think about a portfolio item. So so in English, it is kind of easy to think about it in that way. In some other languages, that word has a slightly different meaning. It's never been used in terms of software development. So we might just use the English word epic because that's how everybody's talking about epics, even if the native language has a solid translation and it's not a proper name. It is just not something that has ever been translated into that language because it's very technical and it's a fairly new use for the word. So it really depends on the language. And I think this is kind of where you need to go back and maybe discuss with some of the developers from your country what word they might be using for a particular concept.
So the technical question is, do we leave them in English or accept the translation as is in English or ignore it? What do we do with these kinds of words?
Ignoring it would do the same thing as translating it, but I think translating is the right thing to do because that means that we have agreed not to translate it. So if the word GitLab were to show up here and you were asked to translate it, you would just copy it down verbatim and you would accept that translation, so that we agree that in this particular language, this word will not get translated. And here's also a way to vote for certain translations. So here are several translations that we have in French for one closed issue, and they've been submitted by different people. And this particular translation has 16 votes, and I can also upvote it. I am a proofreader as well, so I could potentially even accept this, but this is sort of where we upvote translations, so that the proofreaders can come in and see that, oh yeah, this is the one that has been accepted by everybody else, so that's probably the right thing to do. So the way to discuss some of these is in the app as well. As if you notice, there are comments to the right of each one of these source strings. And these comments are combining the discussions from different languages, because there may be some, typically the questions that we get around these is just context. It's like one closed issue, that's probably more clear, but something like none, well, what's the context? Where does it show up? Is the noun that the none is related to, a feminine or a masculine noun, right? Because it matters to some languages. So this is this is kind of where we discuss and talk and answer questions about each one of these, and come to a conclusion on what is the right approach for translating that particular word. So do use the chat as well to chat with other translators, or just read through the chat. So if a word has a lot of comments on it, it probably is confusing, or was confusing to someone. So there was a question by Sanjung about using the namespaces. It's been namespaces have been tough. They were introduced because a lot of times you have a particular view that has a lot of context. For example, admin settings. So within admin settings, there could be things that are just as simple like back, no, yes, cancel. And without any context, we would have probably dozens of words that say yes or no that have been translated from different views. If we translate all of them the same, that may not work in all of the languages, because the context matters. For example, again, whether the concept is a masculine or feminine, you may use a different word to translate some of these words. So we have introduced the concept of namespaces. So we will tell the translators that this is admin settings, and then separated by pipeline. And then really the word that needs to be translated, or the text that needs to be translated, is the one after the pipeline. So the translation, as you can tell here for French, does not copy down the admin settings part or the pipeline. You really only translate the text after the pipeline, and that's kind of how it's used. And that has also been confusing to people. So there have been a lot of translations where people would just copy down the namespace or translate the namespace. And there's really no great way to do this. So we just have to keep talking about it and keep teaching people. So thank you for asking this. This is really important to get when you do translations, is that namespaces are there just for your context, to help you understand where you are. You can also just look for strings in one namespace to just translate all of them together, which is helpful, because that means that one particular view or one particular concept will get all of those translations done at the same time. So in namespaces, you omit those and you only translate whatever is after the pipeline. And as you can tell here, the underline, some of these words are underlined, which means they have glossary items. And if you're not sure like how that particular concept is being translated into the language, for example, how do we translate runners into French? There's probably a couple different ways. Some of them mean people running. And you can tell here that the French community has decided to translate it into executors, right? So you will use that particular word in your translation. Other great questions? I mean, they're all great. Thanks for bringing some of this up. So I guess we are in this segment.
Harris, I think it might be really interesting to take a peek at the activity that's going on right now through Crowdin. If you could share your screen under activity to see how people are doing or if anyone needs help, this is a time where we can help you.
Ah, good. Look at that. Look at you, Orit. Omar, 22. Thank you. Anna, thanks you for the Kubernetes cluster in Ukrainian. A great example of how Kubernetes will not get translated, but the word cluster will. So Kubernetes clusters would be translated as this into Ukrainian. So Jessica's asking about the formal versus informal. French and German are the ones that I've seen discussions on, but I think some of the other ones, discussions pretty much been had in the glossary. So if you take a look at the glossary, there's probably going to be a translation for you, and probably on that word is where the discussion was had in the chat. If you disagree or would like to discuss, we can always open that up and talk about it more. The way I really think about it is also, if we were colleagues in that country and we were talking about this, is it typical for me to use the formal you or the informal you toward you? So that's one way to think about it. We try not to be too formal. But we also don't want to address people as if they were children, because again, there's like many different levels of formality for a lot of languages. So you kind of have to find that golden middle ground. I have actually found that Microsoft has great guidance. So they have published their guidance for translations that they normally use. They've published those externally. And I've like read through some of that because it's great food for thought for a particular language about how that language is being used and like in what cases you will use a formal versus informal. So I've used that to inform myself. But generally, we try not to be formal and speaking at people from above. So if there's a way for us to use the informal language, that's probably the preferred way to go for GitLab. So we have about 5 minutes left. I'll let you wrap that up while I talk about the last few points that I have here. I just want to make sure that we recap what we've done. Hopefully, all of you have learned how to translate and have created the accounts and are able to do these translations. So, of course, now I expect you to be here daily and be translating, or you'll be getting emails from me. Just kidding. But if you would consider you're setting aside some time, maybe once a month, to go in and do some translations, or even create a small project and say, if you're working on a view, or if you're working in an area in GitLab that you're very familiar with, and you have a language you're familiar with, maybe that's the view that you just take on yourself to sort of translate and make sure it looks good. Or you want to go on a project to decide the formality, because it is important, and you help us lead the discussion and finalize the discussion and get everybody to sort of pull in the same direction as far as what translations are. So that would all be great. I would also like for you to go ahead and invite one more person. I'm sure that you have another person who may not be in this call, who knows a language, who's got another, who's not natively, or whose native language is not English, who would be great to do this, whether they are in GitLab or not in GitLab. Of course, GitLabbers have advantage because they know a lot of these concepts, and it's easy for them to understand what we mean by issue or epic or wait. All of those mean something and are easier for us to translate. But I would like for each one of you to invite at least one more person into the community and see if we can improve the languages and improve the translation levels. I'll be reporting on that as much as I can on the direction page for internationalization, so that we can see sort of if these sessions have actually made a visible difference in our translation levels. So I'm going to leave the last couple of minutes for anyone else to ask a question, to join in, or read if you've got something to add.
I also think that we got a great takeaway here for community relations, and maybe having this activity as part of hackathons, which is also excluding no code, I guess I would call it. Omar had a question on the chat. Is there a way to know whether a string you translate finally made it to the product or got approved for inclusion? It would be cool. It'll be a cool feeling and a motivator to know that my translations are going somewhere.
There isn't a way to know if a particular string, or when a particular string has made it across. However, once a string is approved, the next first of the month is when it will be included. So I do these merges once a month, around the first or the second of the month, whatever day I get to it. And so if you've translated something that was eventually proofread and approved in October, it will be in the November release. So it's always kind of next month release from the month where it got approved, until we get some time to automate some of the merging activity that we have.
Any other questions? If not, I'm going to say, are there plans to translate developer documentation?
No. And that's been a conscious decision, that we would not want to translate the development documentation. We would never be able to keep up, and it's hard for our developers to, so our development documentation changes often, and so this includes not just development documentation, but generally the help docs as well. So the help documentation, as well as developer documentation, is not something that we could rely on the volunteers to translate in time for it to be accurate when people look at this documentation. So this documentation just needs to be accurate and not behind. So I don't think that we can uphold that promise, which is why we've decided not to translate help documentation or developer documentation. Also, developers will typically, a lot of the scripts and a lot of the language and everything that's being used, including the comments in the code, all of those are not going to get translated. So having translations in those documentation would still mean that it would be very mixed between English and whatever language.
Great. I think we're at time. So I'm going to say toda raba. Thank you very much.
Hvala. Thank you. Danke. Domo arigato. Sheshe. Gracias, merci. And bye-bye. Efarihastoné. Děkuji. So, Orit, what was thank you in Hebrew?
Toda raba.
Toda raba. Kamsamida. And too bad we weren't able to have more interaction.
Next time in person, we'll have a live session and everyone can write on a bulletin board.
Everyone can speak.
And speak.
Right.
I'm going to drop Harris.
Okay. I'm going to say goodbye and drop as well. Bye.